Welcome to the Alphagenix podcast, where every week we talk to incredible guests from around the world of biohacking, well-being, men's health, and more. Here's your host, co-founder of Alphagenix, Ross Tompkins.
Well, I'm delighted to introduce our next guest, Kevin Hunt, author of Pain, the Ultimate Mentor. Kevin, welcome to today's show.
Thank you very much, Ross. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to this chat.
Well, we've got quite a lot in common, haven't we, being both from a musculoskeletal past. But how did you transition from there to author? Because that's not something all physios do.
No, I guess not. But, like many physios, we have these things itching at us to try and actually improve the health and well-being of people we see. And I've been 25 years of physio, and, over the last number of years, increasingly, I see a lot more of persistent pain, and also seeing the various lifestyle scenarios that kind of influence our health and well-being. So I've had the book in my head for many years, knocking around in my head. And I guess like many of us as clinicians, we answer the same questions again and again and again and again. And we hear the same narratives coming in from patients again and again and again. And I think a bit like yourself with Alphagenix, you're trying to make people aware that maybe the narratives that they have aren't always necessarily up to date. And actually I thought, okay, I need to get some of these things down on paper so I can get these thoughts, get these concepts, get these ideas in a tangible form that people can digest themselves. So I guess it was ultimately as a consequence of seeing the same stories come through, seeing the same narratives come through that are outdated, and hopefully finding a way to help people and a wider audience than you see yourself in your geographical area in your clinic.
Yeah, you can touch more people's lives when you committed to writing a book and being an author, because it can be read all over the world.
Yeah, and that's the exciting thing for me so far, is hearing stories about where it has been read all over the world. People have read it in Ecuador and Japan and all these places, and I'm like, oh, that's curious how it got out there. But it's fantastic. I'm sure you in your clinical career back in the day, you were kind of mindful of, you would see people from a fairly restricted geographical area, and to think that you can have impact on somebody without ever meeting them, don't even know their story, don't even know their history, don't know the diagnosis, don't know anything, but you can actually have an impact on them through a book. So, as I say, sometimes the pen is more powerful than the prescription.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there, you would see certain persistent problems that were coming back. What were some of those patterns that you saw? For anyone who perhaps is wondering, is that me?
Yeah, very good point, because there's a lot of people who have persistent pain problems and they don't realize they actually have a persistent pain problem. So the reason we use the word persistent pain is that classically or typically people refer to it as chronic pain. But chronic pain, the word chronic means different things for different people. So for some people, chronic means there's nothing you can do about it, you'll have it forever. For some people, chronic means dull, achy. For some people, chronic means sharp, severe. So the word chronic pain over time has become to mean different things for different people. So we now really use the phrase persistent pain. And persistent pain, by definition, is anything that goes on for longer than 3 months after, let's say, the normal tissue healing process that the body will go through, whether that be bone, ligament, tendon, or otherwise. But very commonly in persistent pain, or in fact, nearly always in persistent pain, I would say always, is that everyone with persistent pain has pain-free moments, pain-free periods. Now, those pain-free moments or those pain-free periods might be minutes, hours, days, possibly even weeks or months. So there are a load of people out there who have persistent pain problems, that they get flare-ups of their pain regularly throughout their lifetime. So that might be, for instance, their back that goes randomly every 6 months, 3 years, who knows, or the migraines, or the headache, or the persistent, knee pain, or whatever it is. So there are many people who don't see the link between their pain and their lifestyle. And this is why I've ultimately called the book Pain, the Ultimate Mentor, because when your pain flares up or speaks up to you, it's trying to guide you, it's trying to grab your attention. So very often people will think, okay, I've got persistent pain because I've had this pain for more than 3 months after I had my back problem, my disc prolapse, or my ACL injury, or whatever it may be. But there are a massive number of people out there who have a bad back that goes. And if you look across time, you might have this bad back for 10 years. It just happens to have these flare-ups. So they are persistent pain patients also. And that's why, it's very important to clarify that for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really, really interesting to say that, because I remember I used to say to a lot of patients as well, your pain doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. It just needs changing. It's your body saying, hey, listen to me, you need to be moving more, changing your diet, sleeping differently, changing your job, whatever it might be. But it is remarkable, as soon as that pain disappears, the reason for them to do anything sometimes goes away and they stop.
It's a great motivator, isn't it? Pain. People will do what people will do what's good for them when they must. And this is the thing for me about persistent pain, is that pain is there to grab your attention. It's there to guide you. It's a very blunt tool that steps up and goes, oi, I need you to pay attention to what's going on in your life. And that's why we, as clinicians, as healthcare professionals, as people trying to improve quality of life and health and well-being, we have a duty to try and inform people, your pain system is there to guide you. It's actually the solution, not the problem. And for a lot of people, they want to treat the pain as an independent thing. Give me a painkiller, give me some sort of thing that'll get rid of my pain so I can get on with my life. But once your pain has gone on for longer than 3 months, the pain itself is actually there to have a different role. It's there to guide you towards a better quality of life. But you need a way of understanding that. And that's what I like to think the book is about. And that's what I do on a day-to-day basis in clinic.
I absolutely love that, Kevin. I love the idea that pain is a blunt tool solution rather than the problem that needs fixing with a pharmaceutical or whatever it might be. It's interesting with what we do as well, because aches and pains, persistent aches and pains, are often one of the ways which hormone problem will present, either in men or women. So yeah, fascinating to hear more about how your health hexagon works, which I think we're going to go into perhaps next. It might be a good segue to that.
Yeah, sure. So you will understand, and as you know, there are multiple factors that influence our health and well-being. I've put it in together in a package, if you will, of the health hexagon, which basically says there are 6 things that are important for our health and well-being. That's sleep, diet, physical activity or exercise, cognitive stimulus, cognitive load, emotional load, and then the spiritual space, which is where we switch off, where we get lost in the moment, recharge, refresh, if you will. And each of these 6 elements of our health hexagon has impact on our health and well-being. The difficulty for a lot of people, and a lot of people I see in clinic, I live and work in Cambridge. It's a high-achieving city. A lot of people are pushing themselves, trying to juggle many races, their career, young children very often, or often young children and elderly parents, as well as trying to live a good life and a healthy life. And the difficulty is juggling all of those plates, wearing all of those hats. It's challenging, it's difficult, it's stressful. And very often the lifestyle people are living isn't sustainable. Your body needs a way to step in and go, I know you're trying to be all things to all people. You're trying to be a mom, a dad, a brother, a relative, a friend, a father, an employee, a boss. You're trying to be the marathon runner. You're trying to be the singer in the pub or whatever. You're trying to be all of these things. And actually, you've only got so much capacity to be these things. So we have to get better at figuring out, how do I juggle all of these identities and how do I juggle all these demands on me? And my view is your pain system is the thing that bubbles up to say, we haven't got the health hexagon in a sustainable fashion. So that's why you might get neck pain or back pain or something along those lines. And rather than ultimately blaming the chair you sat in, the pillow you've slept on, the way you've bent and twisted, which are the common narratives that people have. We're trying to say, well, hang on a second. Is it really reliable that as a 40-year-old guy or mom or whatever, that you can't bend and twist? Like, is it really that the case when you bend and twist a million times a day? Why is it that your body is saying, I'm struggling with this? And that's, again, your pain system is trying to alert you. The bending and twisting or the sitting in the chair is not actually the mechanism of injury. Your lifestyle is the mechanism of injury. So we go through the health hexagon and explain some of the science behind how these things work at a biological level, but not in a too academic way. And then we also look at the common themes and narratives that people have that don't help their pain journey, such as that, I've got a bad back because the chair at work is the problem and everything else in my life is absolutely unrelated to it.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of that biology, because I'm sure a lot of people will be watching and thinking exactly that. And well, no, the problem is I bent incorrectly. But now most research suggests it doesn't really matter how we bend over and pick something up.
Sure. I think, listen, with millions of years of evolution have gone into the spine, and if it's meant to bend and twist, let it bend and twist. I mean, it's preventing it from bending and twisting actually sometimes is more unhelpful than that.
Exactly. So what are some of the things that go on inside the body that can contribute to persistent pain?
So we talk about the pain pathway. The pain pathway has three elements. First thing is sensory data. Sensory data is the information coming from the senses. It's coming from the tissues. Typically how well it moves, how strong it is. It's even things you see and hear. So for instance, if you hear your joints make noise, that's sensory data, popping, clicking, crunching, that type of thing. So that information, that sensory information, has to go into the central nervous system to be processed. That's ultimately your brain and spinal cord. Within the central nervous system, we have our stored data. Stored data is everything we understand from past experience, from belief systems, attitudes, our personality even. It is also things we've heard and read and seen. If you're told that discs slip, that then your stored data says that, well, my discs must be like bars of soap that slip in and out all over the place. So that stored data has a very powerful, it's very powerful towards how the body interprets the signals it gets. So the stored data filters the information coming in from the senses, and they're then turned into predicted data. Predicted data is the experience we have. So within the stored data, within the central nervous system, very crudely, we can take the brain and we can break it down into the limbic system, which is our instinctive, reactionary, visceral kind of system. People refer to it as the lizard brain, the chimp brain, that type of thing. But that's our instinct, hurt, harm, risk, reward. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive center of the brain. And as humans, we have a more developed prefrontal cortex than other mammals. And that's where we negotiate with this stored data, or this information. And that can influence massively our predicted data. In other words, how our body responds to a situation. Now, in the processing of the information coming from the sensory system through the stored data to end up being a pain or lived experience, we have connections. Let's put it in a very, very simple term. We've got neural connections, synapses where nerve endings talk to each other. And within those synapses, they're regulated by our immune system. Among other things, astrocytes are immune cells that will regulate the passage of information on from one place to another. And this is happening in the body at 270 miles an hour in real time, all the time, billions of stimuli coming at us all the time. But these astrocytes, this immune system is obviously there to help the flow of information through the system. In an injury, in an acute injury where you break your ankle or you do sprain a joint in your back or whatever, then the system is going to let lots of messages through quite quickly to say, we need to protect this part. You've broken your ankle, don't run on it, don't jump on it. So the sensitivity of this system drops way, 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 way down in order to try and actually protect the injured part. But over 3 months, what happens is as the part is healing, as the part is repairing, as it goes through its normal cycle, in normal circumstances, if you will, the astrocytes will recalibrate back to a reliable measure, and we rehabilitate and we recover and we improve. But in 30 to 40% of patients, it's estimated that actually this system doesn't recalibrate effectively. The synapses remain sensitized, and we end up in a type of pain called nociplastic pain, which is a sensitized central nervous system. And that will happen for many, many, many circumstances: belief systems, lifestyle factors, fear. You stop doing the things that are good for you. But of course, if you're being told and bombarded with information of don't do this, don't do that, that's bad, oh, you've now got back pain, you'll have it forevermore, oh, you've got a bit of arthritis on your x-ray, you're doomed to ever run again, all of that is going to sensitize the system and complicate our stored data. And what we do also know is that when we're under stress or under pressure and living a busy lifestyle and juggling all these hats that we're juggling, you know, dad, mom, business owner, employee, whatever it may be, then the communication between these mechanisms, and particularly the negotiation that takes place between our prefrontal cortex, the executive center of the brain, and the limbic system, gets harder. That's why we find we're more reactionary to things, we're more sensitized to things. And that's why we find it harder to negotiate with ourselves when we're under pressure, because the kids are having problems, the business is going through a good or a bad time. And that's when we start to see our pain flare-ups. And the pain is no longer a reliable indicator of tissue harm or tissue damage, but it is absolutely trying to tell you something. It's saying, we're under pressure here. Our system is more sensitized and is helpful for us, and we need to recalibrate that.
Wow. That's much higher than I thought. 30 to 40% of the time that nociceptive pain continues.
Yeah, and that's even well, the nociplastic pain. Nociceptive pain is the original trauma, let's say, of cutting your finger or whatever it may be. But that's even considered a conservative estimate. Because like you said at the very, very beginning, actually, there are probably lots of people in persistent pain. They just don't realize they're in persistent pain. They have episodes of pain. So they might have episodes where they would say, oh, I have an acute injury, I've injured my back. And then, if you put the pattern together, you think, hang on, this is happening relatively frequently. And that can be because this pain pathway has remained a bit sensitized and it's learned to respond in certain ways. But unless we change our behavior, our lifestyles, our health hexagon, then this pain pathway will remain sensitized to some of those things. So what we're trying to help people see is break some of those old narratives, break some of those old belief systems, break some of those mythologies, and actually help them to see that your pain is there to guide you. Your pain is trying to help you. So, but if you can't see that pattern because you've never really had it highlighted, well, then you don't know what you're looking for. So you will start looking for quick fixes. You will start looking for binary answers. Oh, it must be the chair. It must be the mattress. It must be how I bent and twisted at that specific thing. And our job really is to go, is that really true? Is there a bigger picture at play here than purely the flexibility or the muscle strength or whatever?
Yeah. So as a physio, I'm very familiar with measuring the musculoskeletal system. Your HEXAGON goes into obviously far more detail and across different sectors. Is there a way in which you've developed to measure those and find out which particular one is sensitizing the patient, or is it more of a holistic view where you're just looking at everything?
So I don't think there's any yet reliable measure for it as a whole. There are indicators of various things. You can go into each department of your health hexagon, if you will. So if you want to look at sleep, you can measure, deep sleep and REM sleep and hours slept and, fatigue and all of that kind of stuff. So there are measurables for each thing. How reliable any of those independent things are for each person is I think, and you'll probably agree, you have to measure against yourself. You have to measure against yourself across time, and you've got to know your norms and your things on that score. And this is, again, tricky, where people will take maybe a single data point, heart rate variability or something, and they'll kind of go, oh, I just have to have that okay, and then everything else, that's the solution to all problems. But I like to explain it more through what we call the bucket theory. And the bucket theory has been used in other spheres, if you will. But the bucket theory to me is, if you imagine your body, or any individual part of your body, whether that be your neck, your back, your hip, your knee, or your body as a whole, your person as a whole, it's like a bucket with capacity. You can take a certain amount of water, let's say. And when you fill up that bucket, it'll overflow. And that's when you become symptomatic. Back hurts, knee hurts, headache, migraine, whatever it may be. And then pain is there going, oi, I need you to do something different. So you will then do something to try and bail water out of that bucket. You might change your position. You might have a stretch. You might go for a walk. You might go for a sleep. You might put a hot pack on. You might take a painkiller. You'll do something to bail water out of the bucket, and your symptoms will reduce. But what you don't know is, well, have I bailed out 10%, 50%, 90%? I was sore, or I'm less sore, or I'm not sore anymore. And the tricky thing is that the bucket is not a 24-hour cycle. We don't start off every day with an empty bucket and we fill it up in a robotic, formulaic way all day, every day in the same way. It fills up as it fills up, and it empties out as it empties out. And some days we'll fill it more than others, and some days we'll be emptying it more than others. And that's very often why, with persistent pain in particular, you will be inconsistent. Some days you do something and it hurts, and other days you do the same thing and it doesn't hurt. And that's what we're trying to alert people to, is the inconsistencies often are the clue to whether that particular thing is good, bad, or indifferent. But if we go to our hexagon, the hexagon is the thing that fills and empties your bucket. So a good night's sleep is going to empty your bucket out more than a bad night's sleep. A bad night's sleep is going to fill you up more than a good night's sleep. And that won't in itself necessarily put you over the top and have a pain flare up. But if you're consistently trying to survive on 6 hours sleep at night because you've got young children, or you're up doing reports or working towards a particular project, and you're not using the other elements of your health hexagon, sleep, diet, cognitive stimulus, emotional load, spiritual offsetting, well, then your bucket's going to fill up more, and sooner or later you're going to get a flare-up. So in terms of measurables, yes, you can track independent bits of data, like your Fitbit for your steps, or your resting heart rate, or your sleep hours or quality. And there are devices that will help with that. You can do questionnaires and surveys around anxiety and depression indexes and things. You can do personality tests to get an insight into who you are, how you might tick, how you might operate. You could maybe have a degree of understanding of the personality scores of the people around you. So you go, oh yeah, they do look at the world a very different way through me. And maybe when I'm hanging around with them, my bucket overflows a little bit more frequently. But the thing that does ultimately step up when you've got the balance less than sustainable is pain. So I would say to my patients all the time, pay attention to when you're not. Pay attention to when it's inconsistent, because they're the things that are both filling and emptying your bucket. And when you get a pain flare up, ask yourself, does it make sense? Does it really make sense that I've damaged my back bending and twisting when actually I was playing cricket or golf or rugby and taking the shopping out of the car and doing the garden? But why is it sore today? Well, that's something you can now use pain as your mentor to go, okay, let me consider what it is my hexagon is trying to tell me.
Yeah. And do you go through, well, you must go through that hexagon and educate people on what that means? Because I'm guessing the average person that comes through with a back pain or a neck pain, if you start saying, well, you're spiritually unfulfilled, or you're spiritually overflowing, they're going to go, I didn't come and see you for this. There's probably a certain amount of explanation that's needed.
For sure. And that's something that we have to try and judge, like any clinical interaction. What kind of person, we have a duty to actually, obviously we have a duty of care to get the best for our patients and help their health and well-being. And there are some people who will digest that information quite quickly. And in Cambridge, where I am, lots of academic, intellectual people who actually are hungry to really understand the minutiae of all these things. But yeah, that's a skill, an art form of, okay, how do I judge it? How do I pace it? How much information do you need from me today? How am I going to explain your diagnosis? How am I going to explain the treatment plan? And that, again, has been another reason for writing the book in the first place, is because there is a lot of information. There is a lot of complexity to all this. And we know that people will absorb about 14% of what they hear in a clinical environment. So we do need, I wanted a tool that will go, if you're interested in more of this, read it, come back to me, let's have questions about it. But the way I like to work, in a sense, is we've got to hear people's story. We've got to understand where they're coming from. And if somebody, I'll often say to patients, listen, it's very easy when somebody comes in and they said, life is all good, everything's been fine, and I fell off my bicycle and I've got a sore back. Then we're looking at the acute mechanism of injury. It's still an opportunity for us to consider their health and well-being, going forward, and not turn that acute back injury into a persistent pain problem because of belief systems and everything else. But then if we have somebody who's coming in with a narrative that is a long history of 10-year history of back pain with regular flare-ups, and their narrative is my iliopsoas needs manipulating or whatever, you think, okay, because you've had that done 50 times already at other clinics and you're still here, maybe we need to educate you in a slightly different way. But we have to bring people on that journey. We have to explain the factors that are involved in their injury or their presentation. Sometimes we'll go into that information earlier, and sometimes we'll wait a little longer until we feel it's appropriate, so that they're ready for that.
Yeah, more on board. So I guess you start with things that are more familiar, the mechanical part, perhaps touch on diet and some lifestyle factors, but then at the right time, you're going to start talking about cognitive, spiritual elements.
Sure.
And what sort of practices do you teach or discuss to empty your bucket of those areas?
So that's what I enjoy about the job. So I enjoy discovering what fills and empties people's buckets. There's no generic, like, right, here's your hexagon, live that, and you're living the dream. And it's fascinating, to hear what people put into every department, as it were. Mm-hmm. Each department is not exclusive. At the end of the day, if you go to bed, the sleep department, it's spiritual in and of itself, isn't it? You're getting to kind of just go, oh my God, my bed, I love my bed, and we all have that kind of, when we, come back from our holiday or something, it's like, it's nice to get into your own bed. You can't explain exactly why, but it is one of those. So for me, the spiritual side of things is just where you get lost in the moment, you get absorbed in the thing. Yes, people talk about mindfulness, meditation, all that kind of stuff. But really what I'm interested in is, what do people classify in each department? So for one person, their cognitive load, using their intellect, using their brain, using their mind, that could be spiritual because they like learning, they like self-development, and for another person, it could be a real overwhelming brain ache, So my job in many ways is, once people start seeing that, okay, I can see there's a pattern here. I can see my pain is aggravated by various lifestyle factors. I can see my other lifestyle factors are impacting on my existing pain problem. As an example, you will see people with osteoarthritis of their hip or knee, but if they're going through bereavement, their pain is going to get a hell of a lot worse. But does that mean that they now need that knee replacement or hip replacement? Or do they need a little bit of counseling for grief counseling? And maybe that's what their pain is trying to tell them. Now, I won't be the person to deliver that, but I will be the person to highlight that maybe it's important. Mm-hmm. What is in one department for one versus another is down to that individual. But I think what we see a lot with this kind of 30 to 50 age group is they're trying to be all things to all people, including themselves. And it's not easy to juggle those things. And when your hexagon is primarily work, kids, and you're trying to be fit, because often they're going to be running marathons or going to Pilates or whatever it is, you think, well, I'm doing everything I can. And maybe they do need a little bit more, downtime. But they have to negotiate that. They have to negotiate that with the people around them. They have to negotiate that with their partners, with their family, with their colleagues. And importantly, they have to negotiate it with themselves, because maybe they're measuring the wrong thing. Maybe they're setting the expectations of themselves unrealistically, or maybe they're chasing something that isn't really helpful for them in the long run. And they deep down, they know that, but they don't have the incentive to change it. And that's, again, where the pain system is going. Look for the pattern. We're trying to tell you something. So I don't know if that's answered your question, because I've kind of forgotten what the original question was, but hopefully it's in the ballpark.
Yeah, no, that was good. We were talking about how do you teach people to improve each of their areas of the hexagon, but everyone interprets it, I guess, in a different way. And as you were talking, I was thinking about myself. I love walking in nature, so I guess straight away there, well, you're combining exercise and spirituality, where I have that peace of mind where everything calms down. I can appreciate what's going on around me. It usually helps my creativity. So you could argue it's improving my cognitive function as well. Absolutely. So you can see how, you easily can blur the boundaries, but being aware of it is what's important.
So that's again, is what I'm trying to help people understand. Like, pay attention to the fact that if you go for a walk in nature, you feel better for it. You feel a little bit more organized. You feel a little bit more relaxed. Maybe you sleep a little bit better. And it's like, oh, but I walk on the treadmill for 30 minutes a day on an incline, and my resting heart rate is this, and my HRV is that. It's like, yeah, brilliant. But you know what? Maybe you feel better for going for a walk down by the river. So the book is a lot about that, those stories, those scenarios with patients, but the biology behind it. So we discuss in clinic with patients this stuff. I see physio, or the way I kind of approach physio, is there are 3 phases of physio. One is to restore range and quality of movement, get things moving. Very often when people are in pain, they're fearful of movement. They're protecting the structure, and we have to find ways to help them achieve that. So number 1 is get things moving. Number 2 is to get things stronger. Again, find a way of improving your baseline health and fitness. But also paying attention to the fact that when you do exercise, your hexagon, it's a part of your hexagon, and you feel better, you feel less stressed. Maybe you don't worry so much about the inbox after you've done 20 burpees. Maybe when you go for that run, you're like, oh yeah, that colleague I was having a problem with work, you know what, not worth my energy, dismiss it. All of that kind of stuff is super important. So number 1, get it moving. Number 2, get it stronger. And number 3, look at the lifestyle that's contributed to the problem in the first place. And while we're doing 1 and 2, we're chatting about this stuff, and people are going, yeah, you know what? I'll have conversations on a daily basis with people who are, because as physios, we're in a privileged place that we have time to spend with people. We've good, solid clinical reasoning. We've good, solid understanding of the healthcare system and the wider implications of health and well-being. And people can feel safe with us, I'd like to think. They can allow themselves to feel vulnerable with us, and therefore we can have these conversations that they mightn't ordinarily have elsewhere. So people who are CEOs of companies that we've all heard of, and we all have their products in our houses, telling us they genuinely feel imposter syndrome. We have people who are measuring themselves up against expectations of their parents or whatever it may be, or they have painted themselves into a life that they never wanted. They've become a lawyer or a doctor, a successful one. It's not the life they wanted. And they're now starting to see the connections between this and their pain system. So that's what I like about the job, is helping people to go, here's an opportunity now for us to really consider what's going on here and to invest in your future you. And I'll regularly say to patients, I'm not all that interested in your sciatica right now, because I know we're going to get that better in the next 8 to 12 weeks. but I am interested in your 80-year-old self. I am interested in your independent well-being down the line. So let's have a look at what we can do now, what we can learn from why you're in here on my table or in my clinic, and let's learn on how we can take that to make the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years look a little bit different.
Yeah. And again, a lot of overlap with that. We're looking at the endocrine system in particular, but again, we say, the pillars of endocrine health are eating well, getting good sleep, doing the right exercise, taking care of our mental and spiritual self. So incredibly similar. And again, we might optimize that now and you could feel better within weeks or months, but we're talking about, I want you to be healthy and well forever, or for as long as humanly possible.
As you can be. Yeah. I think that's a real challenge and again, there's a lot of information out there, as that this is the right thing to do, or that's the right thing to do, or be a vegan and all your problems will go away, or no, do transcendental meditation and it'll all be fine, or no, all you need is a goal and you'll be okay. All of these things in and of themselves helpful, but how do we know what's right? How do we know what's working for us? Like, yeah, be a vegan for a while, but then maybe your B12 suffers or something. Mm-hmm. So that's again why I think pain is the guide. It'll step in when you're in that unsustainable place, and that's where you will get a flare up of an old pain pathway. That's where you will be getting the consistent backache. That doesn't really make sense, Now, we have to, again, be mindful. We're talking about persistent pain here. We're talking about pain that goes on for longer than 3 months, and there's been a clinical evaluation. So, we don't want people going, oh, I watched that YouTube, podcast, and they said that all pain is because I'm stressed. It's like, no, we have to go through a process to understand how that's going to work for you. But there's a lot of people out there with persistent pain and complicated lifestyles that are fueling it. So let's have a grown-up conversation.
Yeah, and I can't help but keep thinking as you're explaining what you do about how placebo must come into what you're talking about as well, and because most people are familiar with the fact that studies have been done and you can take a chalk tablet and things go into remission, so they know the power of the brain, they know how powerful it can be. So I guess all we're doing is flipping that the other way around with what you're doing and saying, actually, your brain, your prefrontal cortex can make things worse. Why is that a surprise when we know it can go the other way?
Sure. And that's, again, where the book talks about the science and biology behind these things, to actually explain how these neural pathways work, how that negotiation within the brain takes place, how the various departments of the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, their jobs, their roles, what they do, and then how we can pay attention to, oh, hang on, I can see that when I'm thinking this way, this is the behavior that follows it, and vice versa. So, of course, our thoughts do, I hate to use Descartes about, I think, therefore I am, because I think that can get, skewed in many ways. But, I don't know, let's take a very, very basic example. Your attitudes and your activities, associations, they all matter. I mean, we've all had that, to get a bit crude about it, we've all had that experience where we end up with, I don't know, dodgy tummy or loose bowels when we've had a particularly stressful scenario, I don't know, exam stress, or you're meeting your potential parents-in-law for the first time. That is going to have a biological impact, and is it the dodgy thing you ate at lunchtime? Yeah, maybe, but there is a connection between the narratives we tell ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, the stresses, the pressures, the anxieties we put ourselves under, and what happens internally within our biochemistry, and vice versa. And I'm sure there are people who might have zero empathy, and who knows, they might be various other trait personality things that when they meet their potential in-laws, they are completely emotionless about it and their bowels are absolutely secure. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there too. But this idea that our sense of self, our identity, our thoughts, our actions, our activities, our behaviors is completely separate to the biology of how our body operates is, we all know that's not the case. And increasingly, we are seeing, hang on, maybe our go in, have an operation, cut it out, it'll all be better, isn't necessarily the right approach.
Yeah, I love that. I love that's the message that you're sharing as well, because back when I qualified, back in the 90s, there was still very much that, I'll just go and get it cut out and everything will be fine kind of approach. And it was starting to change, and it's great now. I think you've taken that a step further, and I can only imagine, how much benefit you have in your clinic and giving to your clients. But that said, I guess, how many people have you had over the years that just go, I don't believe you? Like, it's
yeah. So I was having this conversation with a psychiatrist really recently about I wish I could get better at how can I identify the people who it's the kind of growth mindset, fixed mindset. And I wish I could get better at kind of identifying the people who are who are in the growth mindset. But no, because they're the ones who are willing to listen, willing to be challenged, willing to kind of go, okay, I can take your information that you're presenting to me, and I can apply it and look at, does it make sense in my life? Because I always say to patients, it's like, I'm not going to tell you this stuff. You're going to find the evidence for yourself. You're going to find the fact that, it doesn't always hurt every time you sit down in that chair. It doesn't always hurt. The sitting isn't in itself bad because you were in that cafe with the funky chairs and the wonky chairs, and you sat there for 2 hours with your friend having a coffee, and it turns out your back was okay. So now pay attention to that. So you'll find the evidence within yourself. But of course, there are the fixed mindsets that are like, here's what I believe, and I want you to just wave your magic wand and get rid of this stuff. And so we can't help all of the people all of the time, but we can certainly try, and we can certainly go, listen, here's my opinion. And if you've been around the houses a number of times, maybe it's time now to start taking a different view or looking at it in a different way. And we have to sometimes, help people through that journey. What I have found, though, is that there is a group of people who you can, they're not ready for it. And they might come back 6 months, 2 years down the line and go, I've been thinking about what you're saying, and actually, I think I want to explore that a little bit more. And I'm hopeful that the book helps through that, because if they can digest it in their own time, if they can understand it in their own time, then maybe they'll go, okay. For instance, there was somebody who they had, the book has basically changed their opinion of, I was skeptical about all that stuff you were saying to me in clinic, if you will, but now I get it because I've had a chance to understand it or digest it or whatever. So I would like to find ways to help get through to those more fixed mindset systems. But as the psychiatrist said to me, sometimes you do everything you can, but you just have to tell them how it is, in your opinion, and it's up to them. They're grown-ups. It's up to them whether they want to actually, whether they want to go with it or not. And also, in addition to all of that, some people have incredibly complex lives, and their persistent pain is often the thing that is, it's the thing that they're holding on to, so they don't have to make these changes to their HEXAGON. I couldn't possibly consider changing career because I'm in pain. I couldn't possibly consider that relationship I'm in because I'm in pain. I couldn't possibly consider the impact my parenting or otherwise had on me because I'm in pain. I'll get around to that when my pain's over. And that's difficult, because some people, it's like, well, as a physio, we've a certain amount of skill set or tools, but there are areas that, we're not qualified, if you will, to actually really delve into. But at least we can go, your pain is trying to tell you something. Maybe we need to consider some of these things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I guess that for some people, the pain is the only constant. It's the thing they can almost control or allow into their life, if you like.
This is the extreme end. I mean, there's lots of different things going on here, but there's a small number of people. It's like the pain is their identity. And well, what happens if that all goes away? What happens if all of a sudden I am expected now to contribute, in some other way? Will everybody think I was faking it all along? And it's way more complicated than that. And I hope that doesn't get misinterpreted at all. But sometimes people are concerned that, well, if I do get better now, what has this all meant in the last 10 years and everything I've put my family through or whatever? So it's complex. It's very complicated. But for the vast majority of people with persistent pain, it's the narratives, it's the lifestyle factors, it's the stresses and strains of life. And if we can actually go pay attention to some of these things, I know you're putting an awful lot of emphasis over here, but really, is that working for you? And your belief system that if I go into the gym and lift heavier weights, then my back will go away because exercise is good and all exercise is good. And the more exercise I do, the stronger I get. It's like, you're probably, too much of something's no good, too little of something's no good. We've got to find the sweet spot for you. But we've got to find the sweet spot in the 6 departments, not just 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. It makes so much sense. Where do people find the book? Is it on Amazon? Is it on your website? Is it in
so Amazon? It's also available in like Waterstones and places like that. Amazon's the main place. I think my sister and family were in California over the summer because they do some work out there, and they were like, Barnes and Noble, all good, it's all there. So it's available, but mainly just go to Amazon, search Pain the Ultimate Mentor. It's available as a Kindle, paperback, hardback, audiobook. It's all in all the various formats. And if you do get it, please let me know what you think. Leave a review if you'd like, because that does help to get the message out there to a wider audience. But if you go into your bookstore and you would prefer to buy it through them, they'll get it in for you if it's not already in stock.
Amazing. Hopefully lots of people now are frantically typing on Amazon and looking for the book. If what you have talked about has really resonated with someone as well, and they're thinking they want to come and see you, how do they get in contact with you? What's the clinic called? Where can they find you?
So my clinic in Cambridge is called Spinal Physio. So spinalphysio.co.uk. There's also a page for the book called ultimatementor.co.uk. So people can access me there through either of those websites. Drop me an email, kevinhunt@spinalphysio.co.uk. More than happy to engage with that. The nice thing now, obviously post-COVID, is we can do online consultations as well. And that is something that people are comfortable and happy doing. And that's something that certainly has become more popular than I thought it would have done originally. So that's good. So you don't necessarily have to be in Cambridge to have a conversation, have a chat. We can do it that way if you wish. But if you want a quick email, just drop me an email. More than happy to engage that way.
Brilliant. Well, we'll make sure we put all the links on this when it goes out. But Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've truly enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Ross. Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Alphagenix podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss next week's episode. For more resources on Alphagenix and men's health, visit alphagenix.co.uk. Until next time.